All of a sudden, the state lander appears unusually full because to the lengthy train. As Queen Camilla crosses an unimaginable line, shockwaves reverberate throughout the castle. Catherine was left to wonder about the very family she married into after a treasured heirloom that ought to have been preserved for generations was cruelly violated. However, what may have motivated Camilla to carry out such an unimaginable deed? And how is it possible for Catherine to reclaim a fragment of history that has been ripped apart? Come along as we unveil the startling incident that took place inside the palace vault and the reasons Princess Catherine was devastated. The fairy tale, the streets of London were bustling with activity on the morning of July 29th, 1981. Outside, millions of people waited to watch a young woman become a princess. Several had set up camp for the night. While television cameras were positioned all over the place, ready to capture this moment for the 700 million viewers who turned in that morning to witness a girl become a princess, the sound of church bells blended with the voices of the throng. They watched as the doors opened and held their breath as the carriage rolled in front of the cathedral, but nothing could have prepared them for what they saw next. It was the wedding dress. The world had never seen a bridal gown like Diana's. Puffed sleeves lifted her shoulders. The ivory silk taffeta gown glistened in the June sun, and the tiny pearls around the neckline seemed to catch the light as she walked. Then there was the train, which was 25 feet long, and ran like a river behind her. Everyone who saw it was truly amazed since it appeared to have been lifted from a fairy tale. It was just what David and Elizabeth Emanuel, the designers, had envisioned. For months they had been working on the dress covertly, making sure that not a single fabric or sketch left their workshop. The surprise had to be memorable, and Diana had to appear like a real princess. It was more than just fashion, though. History was woven into it by the designers. The gown's smallest touches were significant. It was embellished with antique lace, which linked Diana to earlier royal brides. In order to respect tradition and patriotism, the fabric was imported from Britain. Additionally, a small gold horseshoe was stitched into the label of the outfit to bring good fortune. The garment appeared to speak for Diana that day as she walked up the stairs with her head down beneath her veil, but the charm wasn't only in the way it looked, it was also in the way it made her feel. Diana had already acknowledged that she was afraid that day of the attention, the scrutiny, and the responsibility of what was ahead. But something changed when she wore that dress. Somehow she felt confident enough to walk down the aisle because of the dress's splendor. Diana had produced a worldwide fantasy by the following morning. Her picture was all over the place. Designers praised it as flawless, and every bride aspired to imitate it. The moment the world saw that outfit for the first time, however, could not be replicated. Before tragedy came, Diana's gown was talked about with such awe for many years, and many people looked forward to the day she would give it to her daughter or son's wedding. A horrible incident that happened in 1997 permanently altered the lives of countless people. Princess Diana died in a terrible vehicle accident. The globe was in great mourning after being devastated. However, the palace was left with a lot of questions as tributes poured in from various nations. What would happen to her most valuable possessions? The vestige of fashion. Princess Diana was well known for more than simply her rank and attractiveness. Her heart was well recognized. Her royal residences were children's wards, homeless shelters, and hospitals. She didn't just stop by, she listened while sitting with them and holding their hands. That's why her charities continue to use her name, like a prayer echoed through the ages, even after her death. Nobody was shocked when her possessions were put up for auction, and the money raised went directly to the charities she supported. She raised money for research and relief for people she had met and would never forget by selling dresses, shoes, and even the famous ones that had walked the red carpet. However, we are excellent. We both enjoy classical music as well as ballet and opera and visit it anytime we can. However, the garment that created history, her wedding dress, was the one that everyone believed would never be sold. However, it made sense to the public when it was rumored that it would also be put up for auction. After all, what better present could there be than to auction off the garment if all the other items in Diana's wardrobe had already been donated? People waited, with some even speculating that it may bring in millions. However, that day never arrived. Diana's bridal gown returned home rather than to an auction house or museum. It slept peacefully in the Spencer family's Northamptonshire manor, Althorpe House, for many years. It was maintained there, meticulously preserved, and only displayed at select exhibitions by her brother, Earl Spencer. As they stood in front of the glass display containing the dress that altered royal history, visitors would arrive and whisper in wonder. During their childhood, William and Harry would sometimes travel to Althorpe and want to view the dress. Employees remembered how they would silently gaze at it, as though attempting to picture their mother's feelings the morning she wore it in front of everyone. Then everything changed in 2014. All of Diana's personal belongings were to be given to her sons upon their 30th birthdays, per her will, and they did at last that year. Prince William and Prince Harry were given the dress. Many people thought it had been transported to Kensington Palace, where Diana used to reside, for a while. But family members were aware that it had been kept in a safe vault that was intended to keep the perfect conditions for keeping the outfit intact. Rare appearances of the garment occurred years later, including in 2021, when it was on display at Kensington Palace as part of the Royal Style in the Making exhibition. For the first time in 25 years, the globe witnessed it once more. For a lot of people, it was like witnessing Diana herself walk down that aisle forever. One thing, however, stayed the same throughout all the years and changes. It was never worn by any of her daughters-in-law, not Meghan, not Kate. The robe seems to have lost its royal status. It was part of her tale. The dress's story was never really about a wedding, so maybe that makes sense. It concerned a lady entering a world that never fully comprehended her. When Charles wedded decades later, the tale was entirely different. It was quiet and modest, as if the echoes of Diana's cathedral vows were still present. However, how did Camilla end up becoming queen? As Diana entered each room, why did her recollection follow her? Charles had known Camilla, the princess's shadow, for a long time before Diana showed up. However, her name remained hidden for years, only mentioned in whispered royal passageways and gossip columns. But nothing remains a secret indefinitely. Before long, the world knew the truth about Charles's affair with Camilla. Diana subsequently recalled that it felt like there were three of them in the marriage, and it destroyed her. Following Diana's passing, Charles and Camilla started to show up together more often, initially at private functions before moving on to public engagements and finally royal assemblies. However, each excursion included reminders that Diana was the first to do it and that she had done it in a unique way. The world watched intently in 2005 when their wedding was eventually revealed. The location was not a cathedral. It is quite enjoyable for them to come and speak with us. It's simply unbelievable. There were neither people on the streets nor a 25-foot locomotive following her. Instead, a little blessing was held at St. George's Chapel after a civil ceremony at Windsor Guildhall. Camilla's wedding felt like a corrective, whereas Diana's had felt like a fairy tale, as if the monarchy was attempting to advance without calling undue attention to the past. Camilla wore neither lace nor ivory silk. She had on a golden feathered hat and a pale blue coat. Sure, elegant, yet humble. Her ring wasn't brand new either. The Queen Mother, Charles's grandmother, had previously worn it. The entire event seemed to be whispering something. This isn't a substitute. Furthermore, the world was not prepared to accept her replacement, even if they had attempted to do so. Camilla carried out her royal responsibilities with dignity for many years. However, people were unable to avoid drawing parallels. They never forgot the wedding, for some reason. The murmurs continued even after Charles was crowned king. Perhaps that's the reason. Few people outside the palace were aware of the story's turn when the robe was eventually returned to royal custody. Insiders close to Camilla said that one day she asked to see the outfit that had previously illuminated a cathedral. The gown had left Althorpe at that time. It had been moved under William and Harry's control. It was not shown. No one mentioned it. And it just lay there, protected from time itself by layers of preservation. There was no formality or obligation associated with Camilla's visit. It was not overt. Thus, very few individuals were even aware of her presence. However, no one in her immediate vicinity was aware of the thoughts that were racing through her head that day, as she stood calmly in front of the vault. Maybe she recalled how she and Diana had been compared by the world. Perhaps she simply admired the fact that even after several decades, a single garment could still enslave the entire planet. She appeared to have made up her mind quickly. She slowly unlocked the latches to expose the stunning ivory silk dress. She opened the kit off the shelf next to her, revealing tiny brushes, cotton pads, a bone folder, and narrow-bladed scissors that glowed dimly in her palm. After weighing them briefly, she lowered them in the direction of the cloth. However, would Camilla actually ruin something so holy? The vault was never intended to open on the night of the scissors. There was no palace event or public schedule. However, who refuses the Queen's request? With a kit in her hand, Camilla stood by herself. Her breath was weak on the glass, and the light was dim. The only sound was the hum of the air control, as the preservation team had long since departed. Perhaps she believed that she could finally be free of the gown if she properly looked at it. Taking a deep breath, Camilla raised the sharp scissors. Then there was a faint reverberation in the vault. It was a very small cut. Diana had had her wedding gown trimmed by Camilla. There was another cut, and then another. Once holding the seams of a regal fantasy, the delicate threads started to come away.
No longer glowing or sacred, the pearls were strewn about the table like little tears, the silk crumpled and folded in her hands. Diana's garment breathed again for the first time in decades, yet it died. It took weeks for anyone to notice, and the morning that everything changed started off in the palace just like any other. The air must have felt chilly, because the rain had just stopped. An attendant with shaking hands came in while Catherine was going over paperwork in her private rooms. His voice trembled as he stumbled over the words, but he bowed slightly. He finally murmured that something horrible had occurred, that Diana's precious garment had been torn apart, and that Camilla had touched something that should never be touched. For a second, Catherine did not move. It was as though he had said something unreal. She gazed at him. She could hear her heart beat loudly. She quickly left the room after pushing her chair back without giving it another thought. Her footsteps reverberated across the lengthy hallway. She accelerated, nearly sprinting. As she passed, staff members' faces were filled with concern, but nobody dared to stop her. Every step she took towards the vault was marked by the ticking of the palace clock above her. The guy at the desk appeared startled as she arrived at the guarded wing. He opened his mouth to say something, but Catherine raised her hand and walked right by him. She entered the chilly hallway as the heavy door opened. Her gaze landed on the table, and her heart paused for a moment as she pulled open the vault door. The dress was gone. Destroyed but not quite gone. They tore the ivory silk into shreds. The lengthy train had been torn apart like ribbons after being folded neatly. Like little fallen stars, pearls were strewn all over the floor and rolled into corners. As she arrived at the table, Catherine gasped and staggered forward, bending her knees and putting her palm to her mouth. It was too much to bear. The dress that had formerly belonged to Diana, and to William and Harry as well, was destroyed. Her fingers were shaking when she touched the fabric. Although it was soft, the silk was dead. As though she might shield what remained by hugging it to her chest, she raised a strip. However, nothing could reverse the actions taken. Catherine's voice trembled as her eyes welled with tears as she attempted to ask inquiries. There weren't many enquiries. Who did this had been made plain by the aide. The Queen Consort herself was the one. The dress was Catherine's obligation because she placed a high importance on duty. She understood how much her husband and his brother treasured the dress, but she was never able to meet her mother-in-law. She was devastated to see it in this condition, and to know that she would have to break the news to William. Then the tears started to flow. She was in great pain, but something heavier had started to rise beneath it. Still clutching a piece of silk, she rose slowly to her feet. At first her back was straight, but her steps were shaky. Through her sadness, she turned to face the entrance, her eyes blazing with resolve. But how would William respond to the unimaginable, if the truth came to light? A clash. Catherine's eyes were still crimson with rage, but the tears had ceased by the time she exited the vault. Her heart was racing as she moved purposefully, her thoughts focused on the reality she could no longer ignore. Camilla was sitting in serene comfort somewhere deep within the palace, maybe oblivious to the destruction that had been left in its wake. Unexpectedly, Catherine walked into the room, and tension instantly rose as soon as their eyes locked. It was a conflict between two legacies, one based on survival and the other on pain, rather than just two women. As though she didn't know why Camilla had come, Camilla stayed silent. Years of spoken bitterness and sorrow were born in their silence. The presence of Catherine was like a hurricane that had finally lost its control. Her palm trembled as she held the piece of silk, and the ripped cloth stretched out like an open wound on the table next to them. It was impossible to ignore the meaning. Jealousy and the desire to get away from a shadow that would not go away were the reasons for the destruction of something valuable, not need. Words were not necessary for the confrontation to cause pain. No amount of shouting could match the silence itself. On opposing sides of history stood two ladies who were bound by the same crown, one plagued by a history from which she was unable to break free. The other was mourning a legacy she will never be able to preserve. The palace seemed to shrink in that instant. The weight of what had been done had diminished its majesty. Catherine's anguish had solidified into resolution by the time she turned aside. With a distinct goal in mind, she walked out of the room without turning around. William was back in the private room, waiting. He knew something had happened when he saw the expression on Catherine's face. Without saying a word, Catherine opened her hand and found 3 tiny pearls, fragments of the past that were now laden with significance in her palm. They walked to the vault together. Sensing the seriousness in their quiet, the door guards moved aside without question. The air within was frigid and strong with the smell of preservation when the door opened. The remnants of Diana's garment were in front of them. It was a long time before William moved. Although his face was composed, the storm was in his eyes. He took a step forward and touched the ripped border of the gown with his fingers. He clenched his jaw. There were no words, but there was a lot of implicit anger in the hush around him. He stooped to pick up one of the pearls that were lying around. He held it close for a moment, like a heartbeat, and then laid it gently next to the others. Every movement made the weight of his emotions shake beneath it. Catherine continued to clutch the little golden horseshoe as she stood next to him. The vault felt like a tomb to them, and the light reflected off it dimly. There seemed to be a hint of that day in 1981 in every thread on the table, but suddenly it was all gone. William slowly straightened and started to give clear instructions after being desecrated by hands that ought to have protected it. It was necessary to carefully gather every last bit of silk and every pearl that had been scattered. There was nothing to be fixed or changed. The vault was to be permanently shut, and the dress, in its ruined form, would be sealed and kept precisely as it was. When everything was finished, he faced Catherine with unwavering determination. He put a pearl in his pocket and another in her hand. As if to recall what had been lost, he placed the final third on the vault's window ledge. Catherine kept the gold horseshoe near her chest as they walked out of the vault. At the entrance, William stopped and took one last glance behind him. His silhouette was framed by the corridor's light, which created lengthy shadows on the shattered remnants of silk. It was more than a tattered clothing that lay behind him. It was a memorable and intimate wound. And for William, everything had changed, even though nobody outside that vault would ever know what had transpired that evening. The two sat together in their own room, late one evening. The tiny gold horseshoe Catherine had removed from the damaged garment was lying between. It shone dimly in the lamplight, a sliver of good fortune from a dashed hope. They didn't say anything because there was nothing more they could say to make the dress return. However, a new understanding emerged during that silence. While the past could not be preserved, its spirit could be safeguarded. They vowed to uphold Diana's legacy that evening, not with items that could be stolen or burned, but by living actions that were impervious to destruction. From that point on, Catherine's work became more profound. Her tenderness reflected Diana's own warmth when she visited children's wards and hospitals. She stayed longer than her schedule permitted, listened, and offered consolation. Every smile she gave was a reflection of Diana's kindness. William also discovered a new purpose for his work. Together they met families in need, donated to mental health charities, and had candid conversations about loss and vulnerability. With each action they restored what the scissors had destroyed, but not with silk, but with people. Catherine made sure Diana's memories persisted throughout their kids' lives at home. She told them about the warmth and laughter that used to fill her days, and she showed them pictures of their grandmother. The kids came to view Diana as a member of their family, whose spirit continued to silently lead them from beyond, rather than as a historical person. They exchanged tales and put flowers. Little Louis inquired about her crown, Charlotte about her smile, and George about her charitable efforts. Catherine gave thoughtful answers to all of the questions. Diana's memory transcended the realm of history. It evolved into a living presence that permeated every aspect of their life. William's rage was just the start though, as Harry's discovery caused even more sorrow. How would you handle losing your mum again? The brothers' sorrow. The word was given almost hesitantly to Harry, but it had to be delivered, so it hit him with deadly power. He and William had defended Diana's bridal gown as their mother's most revered artifact, but it was gone. He sat motionless for a while, gazing at the ground. There were no words, only his chest's hollow rise and fall. Memories came pouring in. At 12, with the cameras flashing like lightning, he walked behind his mother's coffin, his footsteps echoing next to William's. He found great solace in the knowledge that a part of his mother had been preserved in an untouchable and secure form over the years. Even that was now ruined. His body stiffened in shock at what he had discovered. For Harry, it was betrayal as much as fury. Once again, the palace that had vowed to protect his mother's memory had fallen short. He remembered the small box that had kept the garments safe for so many years. As a boy, he had touched one of them. For him, losing her again was more important than the disintegration of the fabric. He sat by himself that evening, looking at a framed picture of Diana from her wedding. Her smile seemed to sparkle under the glass, bright and cheerful. He apologized in a whisper to himself, to her, and to William, for not being present, and for failing to safeguard what was important. Harry had left the palace, and he and William had been at odds for a few years. Maybe he thought he could have prevented it from ever happening, if he had been in the palace. Once the bridal dress was more than just lace and silk. It had represented youth and unattainable ideals, as well as purity and promise. It was the manifestation of a fairy tale to the world. It demonstrated to her sons that their mother had once been content, although briefly. That emblem is no longer there. More than just an heirloom was lost when the clothing was destroyed. It was the breakdown of a collective memory. It had been the final physical link between William and Harry, something they both cherished equally, and something that only their mother owned, not the press or the throne. Now that it was gone, the gap between them appeared to be growing and nearly unbridgeable. The atmosphere in the palace darkened. Nothing could undo what had been done, even though the pieces of the garment were kept in exact order. The air itself felt altered and haunted by what was absent, even though every strand had been preserved and sealed away. The loss of something priceless was felt even by people who had never known Diana. It seemed to the few who were aware of the reality that time had turned back on itself. Behind closed doors, the same sorrow that had previously sounded London's bells now reverberated softly. There had always been equal parts sadness and light in Diana's story. Those two worlds had once been balanced by her outfit, part memory, part heart dream. It has lost that balance now in its destruction, and one reality was left unsaid in that stillness. In addition to the loss of a relic, the gown's destruction marked the conclusion of a vow made by two brothers to jointly preserve their mother's heritage. Do you believe that rather than preserving Diana's memory in a vault, Catherine and William were correct to transform it into something living? Do you believe Diana would be pleased with how her legacy has been carried on if she were here with us today? Please let us know what you think in the comments area. For more, don't forget to subscribe, like, and share. Click the following video that appears on your screen as well. You'll like it.